It's been about 10 years since this happened, but even now, I still get chills thinking about it. Back in high school, I had this boyfriend, David, though everyone called him Davey. We were both 17, and looking back, we were both pretty messed up. My brother had died from an overdose not long after my parents split, and I guess that's why I clung to Davey so hard. He was my distraction, my own personal train wreck I couldn't look away from. Everyone knew Davey was trouble. I knew it too, but he had this wild charm, this grin that made everything seem like an adventure, even when he was pressuring me to steal money from my mom's purse. That still kills me when I think about it. My mom and I are trying to rebuild our relationship, but some things just take time. We lived in suburban Michigan, which meant there was plenty of abandoned factories around town. Perfect spots for stupid teenagers to hang out in. I was pretty rebellious back then. My parents' divorce was nasty and they made us choose sides. I know some people can handle that kind of stuff, but at that age, I definitely wasn't one of them. Looking back, dating Davey was definitely a mistake. Maybe it was my way of crying for attention, but regardless, he was just so exciting, but wrong for me at the same time. It was a Friday night in October when Davey convinced me to sneak into one of those abandoned buildings with him. It was almost pitch black out, and we only had some cheap flashlights Davey always kept in his car. We wandered around aimlessly, smoking cigarettes, laughing, gossiping about people from school, the whole thing. The air inside was thick, moldy, damp, with this lingering, sour smell like something had rotted and no one had ever bothered to clean it up. Our footsteps echoed against the grimy concrete floor, and occasionally we'd hear rustling. Probably rats or something, but we pretended it was nothing. After about an hour, we reached a long corridor lined with old doors. I remember gripping Davey's hand tighter as we walked, trying not to admit to myself how scared I was. Finally, I stopped in my tracks, looking at him, silently begging him to turn back with me. He rolled his eyes and then, without warning, let go of my hand and sprinted ahead, laughing as he disappeared into the room at the end of the hallway. "Davey," I hissed, trying to keep my voice down. "Come on, this isn't funny." I ran toward the door to find him. He turned his flashlight off, but I heard him brush past the door. I saw his light flick back on, and I aimed mine toward the end of the hallway. That's when I saw Davey stumble out of the room. His face had completely changed, pale, eyes wide like he'd seen a ghost. "Erica, don't go in there," he said, his voice trembling. Of course, like many times before, my curiosity got the better of me. I brushed past him, pushing the door open slowly as he half-heartedly tried to stop me. I expected some stupid prank. The first thing that hit me was the overwhelming stench, sharp, metallic, and worse than anything else in that room. What I saw made my blood turn cold. The room was filled with objects hanging from the ceiling. I stepped back in horror when I realized what they were. Animal heads, rabbits, raccoons, even cats, all strung up from the ceiling at different lengths, their glassy eyes reflecting back at me. They swung gently in the stale air, shadows dancing eerily on the walls. My stomach flipped. My knees buckled. I let out a gasp. Then I almost screamed, but before I could, Davey clamped my hand over his mouth. "Quiet!" he whispered harshly, his voice shaking even more now. We both stood frozen. For a second, there was nothing. Then a slow, deliberate, shuffling sound started somewhere deep within the factory, like someone dragging their feet across the floor. My heart was pounding painfully against my ribs, and my eyes watered with fear. We didn't move. We just listened, hearts pounding so loud I thought whoever was out there might hear us. Then, out of the darkness, this awful, broken laughter echoed towards us. It was warped, almost childlike but wrong, like whoever it belonged to had long forgotten how to sound human. Pure panic surged through my veins. "Run!" Davey shouted, grabbing my hand and pulling me out of the room. We sprinted blindly through the darkness, our footsteps thunderous but still overshadowed by that terrible laughter, chasing us, getting closer, turning into this gasping, wheezing cackle that chilled my bones. We didn't stop running until we burst out into the cold night air, gasping, running desperately for Davy's car. I was sobbing, terrified that whoever or whatever it was would catch up to us. Somehow we made it, locking ourselves inside and driving away faster than we ever had. Even as we peeled out of that lot, I kept glancing behind us, half expecting to see something or someone chasing us. When we got to my house, Davy looked at me with pure terror in his eyes. Davy was never the chivalrous type, and I knew how affected he was when he did something completely out of character and walked me to my front door. My fingers trembled as I tried to put the key in my door. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well that night. Davy and I never really talked about that incident again. We slowly grew apart and broke up 3 months later. I slept with the light on every night for a while after that. Years later, when a lot of the immediate trauma from the incident had become more manageable, I decided to finally tell my mom. Like I said before, my mom and I weren't on the best terms for a while, but we both worked really hard to bring down the walls between us. As I told her the story, she looked exactly as terrified as I expected, worried like any mother would be. But when I finished, she asked me again if this happened during my junior year. When I confirmed, she looked down at the floor. "That's strange, honey," she said slowly. "Around that time, when I was grabbing the mail one morning, I found a dead rabbit's head on our welcome mat. I thought it was probably the neighborhood cat or something." After hearing this, I stared at my mom in horror, realizing whoever or whatever was in that factory might have known exactly where we lived. They might have followed us home that night if they knew exactly where we lived. Even 10 years later, knowing someone that twisted could still be out there terrifies me. By this point, I've moved away from Michigan, but sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear that shuffling sound, that terrible laughter just outside my bedroom door. I never used to be a morning person. Honestly, I spent most of high school hitting the snooze until the last possible second. But junior year changed that when I got a part-time job at the local grocery store. With my shifts routinely running from right after school until 9 p.m. most weekdays, I had to completely rethink my entire schedule. My New Year's resolution was to finally get in shape. Coach had been bugging me to try out for track in the spring, and I was tired of being the skinny kid who got winded climbing the stairs the second period. The only time I really had to exercise was early morning, which is why I joined the 24-hour fitness center near my neighborhood. For the first couple weeks of January, the gym was surprisingly crowded, even at 5 a.m., when I typically go. New Year's resolutions, right? But by the third week, the place had emptied out considerably. Most mornings, it would just be me, maybe one or two dedicated adults getting in a workout before their office jobs, and the half-asleep employee at the front desk. I actually preferred it this way. I could use whatever equipment I wanted without waiting, and there was something peaceful about having the place almost entirely to myself. Last Tuesday morning, I went in around 4:45 a.m., earlier than usual because I had to finish up some homework before first period. The gym was practically deserted, just me and the front desk guy, who barely looked up from his phone when I scanned my membership card. I started with some cardio on the treadmill, then moved on to the weight section. That's when I first noticed him. He was standing near the water fountain, a man I'd never seen before. And look, I don't want to sound judgmental, but something about him just seemed immediately off. He was wearing clothes that were way too big for him, baggy sweatpants that had been cut off at the ankles, and a stained hoodie that hung down past his hips. His hair was long, greasy, and matted down in places. Now, even though our town is pretty safe, I've seen my fair share of homeless people downtown, and this guy definitely had that look. But our gym requires a membership card to enter, and it's not exactly cheap. I wondered how he got in, but figured maybe he was just having a rough patch and life, and just decided to keep his membership anyways. What really bothered me wasn't his appearance, though. It was how he wasn't actually working out. He just kept wandering around the gym, looking at equipment, sometimes sitting on a machine for a minute without using it, then moving to another area, and every so often, I'd catch him looking in my direction. I tried to ignore him and focus on my routine. After about 20 minutes of weightlifting, I needed to use the bathroom. The men's locker room was at the far end of the gym, past the row of private training rooms. As I walked there, I noticed I couldn't see the strange man anymore. The locker room was completely empty when I entered. I headed into one of the toilet stalls, closed the door, and sat down. That's when I first heard it. A soft giggle coming from the stall next to mine. I froze. I hadn't seen or heard anyone else coming into the bathroom. The giggle turned into a whisper. I couldn't make out what was being said, but it sounded like someone having a conversation. Then more giggling. Now, I'm not usually one to eavesdrop, but it was early. We were practically alone in the gym, and something about the situation just felt wrong. I leaned closer to the dividing wall, trying to hear what was being said. The whispers got louder, but still incomprehensible, like someone speaking in tongues or a language I didn't recognize. Suddenly there was a loud metallic clatter on the floor. I looked down and felt my stomach drop. There on the bathroom floor next to my feet was a knife. Not a pocket knife or something ordinary. This was an old rusted butcher knife with a wooden handle that looked like it had been soaking in water for years. A new sound erupted from the stall next to me. Loud, manic laughter. Instinctively, I looked up. There, peering down at me from above the divider, was the man I'd seen earlier. His face was contorted into a wide, toothless grin. His eyes were bloodshot and wide, staring directly at me with an intensity I couldn't even describe. He was gripping the top of the divider with dirty, long, fingered hands, and had apparently climbed up just to look over at me. "Want to play before school, boy?" he whispered in a voice that sounded like gravel. I don't even remember leaving the stall. Pure adrenaline kicked in, and the next thing I knew, I was running out of the locker room, yelling for help. The front desk employee finally snapped to attention, saw the panic on my face, and immediately called the police. Officers arrived within minutes. They found the man still in the bathroom, sitting in the stall with another knife. This one looked newer, clutched in his hands. According to the police, he had a whole collection of knives in his backpack, which they found stashed behind the toilet. It turns out he wasn't a member at all. He'd been sneaking into the gym by catching the door when people left, then hiding out in the building. The police said he'd been living in the utility closet of the gym for nearly 3 days, coming out at night to use the showers and steal from the vending machines. As they took him away, handcuffed and surrounded by officers, he kept laughing, that same manic laugh I'd heard in the bathroom. When they walked him past me, he turned and stared directly at me, still smiling that horrible toothless grin. I canceled my gym membership that day. I've started working out in the garage now. My dad helped me set up some basic equipment. My mornings might be a little less convenient, but at least I know exactly who's in my garage. The police never did figure out what he planned to do with those knives or why he slid one to me under the stall divider. Maybe he was just trying to scare me, or maybe he had something much worse in mind. The officers later did tell me he had a history of mental illness and targeting teenagers. The worst part? I still see him sometimes, not in person, but in my dreams, grinning down at me from impossible places. And I still hear that disgusting manic laugh.